What if, just a few days later, Mr. President, your administration would have listened and acknowledged the fact that many of us had called for the right sizing of government. And yes, we did break it down very easily in no uncertain terms. That of the $5.6 billion in the corporate fund, we wanted to go back to pre-COVID level spending, which would have, despite an adjustment for inflation, reduced the budget by $568 million. Folks said, what are you talking about? Where? We shared it with you. We told you which departments were bloated. We told you which departments were different, and incidentally, it wasn't police and fire. We said that these cuts should be the starting point for a conversation, for a line-by-line discussion with every department to justify why they needed the increased spending. And there were some departments, Mr. President, that were already reaching out saying we can justify that spending. And I said, great. I look forward to having you called back before the committee so we could have this discussion. Sadly, that was a discussion that never happened. Again, we continued, despite this council's rejection of a $300 million property tax with a budget that had, in effect, no revenue attached to it. We continued with our process rather than getting back to the line-by-line discussions that we wanted to have. And then, just a few short days ago, this meeting was abruptly called to an end because nobody in this room wanted to vote for that budget. $68 million tax increase, $180 million in other fines, fees, and whatever became today's stack of amendments we got at 1 o'clock this morning. The PowerPoint was great yesterday, but finally we see in writing. And what are we learning today in writing? Why yeses, why no's are becoming yeses? Because things like the sidewalk shoveling program, which was taken out, are now back in. It took us all of 15 minutes on Tuesday of last week to try and go through the amendments last time, but we're not going to have that chance today because this isn't a committee meeting. This is City Council, which means when a budget amendment eventually is made, it's going to be just an up or down. It's not a discussion, it's not a debate. We're not going to hear from the CFO, the budget director, or anybody, or the comptroller. It's going to be, trust us. Trust us that what we said is legitimate. But my what-ifs aren't done, Mr. President, because 15 of us, the Alderman of the 2nd Ward, 9th Ward, 10th Ward, 13th Ward, 18th Ward, 23rd Ward, 24th Ward, 31st Ward, 32nd Ward, 36th Ward, 41st Ward, 42nd Ward, 45th Ward, 50th Ward, and of course the 15th Ward, stood up and said to you yesterday, and to all of you, that despite the fact that we had given you a list cutting almost $600 million just based on the inflation adjustments, we came back with something different yesterday. We came back with $824 million in cuts based on what is right in front of us today. Cuts that are more than just bullet points. Cuts that, as we have heard about some of the police spending and the non-existent office spending, but we also talked about cuts to departments that don't even have the efficiencies that were promised to taxpayers years ago, like the Office of the Public Safety Administration, which, if we allowed police, fire, and OEMC to do their thing, would save $61.3 million. We talked about not paying the $175 million pension payment to non-teacher CTU members over at the Board of Education, a separate government body, by the way. And why should we not pay them? Because we already paid them once, and they stiffed us, and now they're going to stiff us again while we pay them for their pension. We said, let's maintain funding levels for our youth, for our homelessness, and not get confused by calling it the Migrant Mission 2.0. We even proposed something that was referenced on the very first day of the budget hearings, which we heard nothing since, which was why the corporate fund, which is funded by property taxes, has to make pension payments for all of the special revenue funds that exist. The water fund, the sewer fund, the emergency management fund, the TIF fund, the affordable housing fund. Why are we making pension payments through the corporate fund for those special revenue funds and then getting reimbursement later? Because that reimbursement falls off the books at the end of the year. And those total pension payments equaled $230 million. $230 million that property taxpayers have to pay on the front end just so we can get reimbursed and shunt off to some secret fund later in unassigned surpluses. Now, I know that my colleagues have said, well, show me the specifics. Mr. President, we are the legislative branch. We do not have 70 people at our beck and call to run the numbers, and even when we shared the numbers, no one wanted to answer those numbers. We could have had, and still can, by the way, have an in-depth, robust, and to use the word collaborative discussion on this because we are still 15 days away from the deadline. What if we had started at zero 47 days ago? What if we had taken this effort to cut every single day? In 24 hours' time, your administration saved $2.8 million simply by cutting 26 jobs out of the budget. This is what we got again at 1 o'clock this morning. Now, if we were to do that every single day for 47 days, imagine the amount of money we could save from this budget. Because when we say cut the fat, cut the middle management, one singular assistant commissioner from 3 different departments is not enough. It is not enough to say that. What we have seen, Mr. President, as of late, is an effort to rewrite history. Because there are some folks who I don't necessarily agree with, who did stand up from the beginning and say no taxes, and I applaud them for standing up for that. But there are many other individuals who say, this is what we wanted from the beginning, no property tax. This is the right sizing we wanted from the beginning. And that is not true. Because every iteration of this budget, and there have been 4 of them, had a property tax or fees or whatever, and every single one of them had the go-along gang cheering for its passage. We are the ones who stood up. We are the ones who have been driving this conversation, and we can still do better. We don't need to rely on recalibrating, reconfiguring, and reforecasting just to get to equal on both sides. We've also seen, Mr. President, as we talk about the future, and I know your legacy is top of mind. Next year's budget discussions are only 8 months away. We have heard from our creditors on multiple occasions that we are going to get downgraded if we do not address our pension payments, if we don't pay our debt, if we only rely on one-term fixes. And somehow we managed to accomplish all 3 in this budget. We know what is going to happen. Because despite all those things that are done, that we've done up to this point, the instability factor remains here as well. The lack of trust and faith is evident by so many, even among those who call themselves your most ardent supporters. We have to do better. And allow me to end with this, Mr. President, because I don't need to think back to history. I don't need to play back to the future. I remember when I first was elected in 2015, and I remember what the $550 million property tax was, and I did not like that. It pained me to do that. But do you know why we had to do that? For those of you who like pointing the fingers at those of us that had to make that choice, we did that because everyone before us had kicked the can to avoid raising taxes, to avoid cuts, to avoid right-sizing government, to avoid living within our means. We kept taking out more and more credit, borrowing, bonding, whatever they had to do back then to avoid any kind of fiscal accountability. In 2015, that check came due. It had to be paid. And if you think that dodging or cutting 27 jobs is going to be enough to avoid that conversation in 8 months, when we are facing a $1.1 billion deficit already and $1.3 billion in the year after that, you are sadly, sadly mistaken. The answer today should be no, because the question is what if, but what will be when this goes through and we fail our constituents again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Alder Fuentes.